Waiver Wire Week 11. We're already in Week 11 here. Thanksgiving is around the corner. This is the time of year where the bye weeks become very, very difficult. This is the time of year where it's for you guys that are still watching this show in Week 11, you're fighting for a playoff spot or you're fighting for a playoff bye. A lot of people who are like in 12th place, 11th place, they check out this time of year. Like there's less people listening to the podcast, fewer people watching the YouTube show when you get this deep in the year. This show right now, this is for the real ones. This is for the ones that are competing, that are fighting tooth and nail to get into their playoffs, or they're fighting to get that bye. We're going to try our best to get your roster ready for fantasy football playoffs. And when we talk about the playoffs, we got to deal with these bye weeks first. This is a tough week. No doubt about it. Week 11 is a difficult one. You have multiple teams on a bye. Arizona, Carolina, the New York Giants, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is actually a very sneaky, hard week for running backs because James Conner, Chuba Hubbard, Tyrone Tracy, Rachaad White, and probably Buck Irving, either in a flex or flex consideration for a lot of you. So you've got like 5 viable running backs that are out this week. But this week is sort of like the tip of the iceberg because week 12 is one of the most difficult weeks of the entire season. And on Waiver Wired, we're always trying to be 1 week ahead of things. We want to be a week ahead of our league mates, and we want to be a week ahead on decision making. That's how you save that fab, and that's how you're not like fighting your league mates tooth and nail for like the same guys, even the same defenses, the same kickers. There's going to be 6 teams on a bye in week 12. This is Byemagaedon: Atlanta Falcons, Buffalo Bills, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the New Orleans Saints, and the New York Jets. Once again, Atlanta, Buffalo, Cincinnati, Jacksonville, New Orleans, and the New York Jets. So there's a lot of very, very fantasy viable players that are going to be unavailable to you in week 12. You've also got 2 quarterbacks who are like locked in Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. A lot of you need to make sure you're prepared for those guys. Atlanta, you've got Drake London, you've got Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney, all in your lineup, Jamar Chase. This is a difficult week. Obviously, Alvin Kamara. So get prepared for week 12. Week 12 is one we don't want to catch up with us. So again, 4 teams on the bye this week and 6 in week 12. We're on this show, we focus on waiver wire additions for people in deeper leagues and very competitive leagues. So if you're looking for like shallow league waiver wire advice, this is not the show for you. I saw somebody recommending Cedric Tillman as a waiver wire ad, thinking that like somebody cut Cedric Tillman because Cleveland was on a bye week last week and you can go at him this week. Like some of the big media waiver wire shows don't offer you anything if you're watching a show like this. So no disrespect to those people. I'm sure that there's like 8-man leagues where Cedric Tillman is available, but we're not going to talk about players like that. We're going to talk about players that can help you out. But one thing for you to pay attention to this week is pay attention to the players that are cut and pay attention next week to the players that are cut, because there might be players that are unforeseen cuts that we don't even cover because people don't prepare for bye weeks. You prepare for bye weeks. You're watching this show, but a lot of your league mates might not. So first thing we're going to talk about is a few shallow league ads. These players are available in 60% of leagues. So the players I'm going to focus on today are going to be available in 70% of leagues or more. So these players are all rostered in 30 to 40% of leagues right now. Braylon Allen, he's rostered in 67% of leagues. One of the most valuable handcuffs in football. If Breece Hall were to miss time, Braylon Allen would be a very, very helpful player to you. Ricky Pearsall, available to you in 63% of leagues. Now, Juwan Jennings obviously is getting a ton of hype, but Ricky Pearsall is still a player that we really want to add. We saw increased usage after the bye week, which is always a good sign for rookies. Pearsall had an end zone target. He caught a long touchdown. He looked explosive on it. 4 catches, 73 yards, and a touchdown. No-brainer ad, and he's going to be available to a lot of you. He would have made my top 10, as would Braylon Allen. Demarcus Robinson, this is obviously a depth piece wide receiver. He had 4 touchdowns in 2 games before last night's game. Touchdown or bust player, but he still gets high-value targets from Matt Stafford. Xavier Legette. Xavier Legette's like a wide receiver 4 rest of the season. Unexciting because of the quality of the offense, but Legette is sort of locked in. He's on the field all the time, first-round pick. Bo Nix, this is a fun one. He's going to be available to you in some competitive leagues because, people are preparing for the bye weeks. Bo Nix is available in 67% of leagues. He's got very strong matchups coming up that are fantasy-friendly. And then Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz is falling somewhere in this 30 to 40% rostered range. He's providing low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 numbers pretty much every single week. Doesn't necessarily have that ceiling in him like he used to, but he's a very solid floor play. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go over the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers. This is a fun week. There's a lot of guys on this list are going to be speculative, but some of these players are players that might be in your lineup when the fantasy playoffs start.
Hey, I know it's a popular statistic to cite, these underdog pick'ems, the vast majority of people go more than on any given player. Yeah, close to 80% of people, but that's because it's easier to find the shootouts than it is to find the dud games every Sunday afternoon. Like we knew week 5, Ravens-Bengals was going to be a shootout. And there goes Lamar Jackson for 4 touchdowns. There goes Joe Burrow for 5 touchdowns. Derrick Henry gets there. Zay Flowers is over 100 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both got there, as well as Chase Brown. Both Chases got there. You go more than, you win 100x your payout on Underdog with their Pick 6 contest. But then you look at Dolphins-Patriots, that's going down the toilet, right? Too bad Ramondre Stevenson at 18 fantasy points. But you improve your chances at positive returns when you correlate with these Underdog pick'ems. Use promo code Underworld. This is the biggest bonus Underdog has ever given out, up to $125. Promo code is Underworld. Put in $250, you get $125. Now go start picking.
Welcome back to Waiver Wired. I'm Theo Gremminger. Let's start at the quarterback spot. Quarterback this week, there's some interesting names. As always, we're going to find players that we can add off the waiver wire at the quarterback position in most leagues. Drake Maye still makes my top 10 overall. Last week, I had him as the number 1 ad, and last week was not great, but we have seen what his rushing ceiling looks like. He had 95 yards on the ground in week 9. We've seen him have a 3-touchdown pass game, and Drake Maye sort of is just making plays happen. This was never going to be a game where he was going to put up a huge fantasy number. Chicago has big-time issues on offense, but Chicago has a big-time defense, and the Patriots survived and got the win. Drake Maye, if you need an upside option at the quarterback position, if you've been streaming, Drake Maye makes for a really fun one. Staying at the quarterback spot, Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson is available to you in 78% of leagues, and Wilson's got to be a streaming option. And Pittsburgh looks like a dark horse Super Bowl contender in the AFC. They have talent on both sides of the ball, and Russell Wilson is now 3-0 as a starter. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but there's been some sort of uninspiring play with Kansas City. Baltimore can't stop anybody. Pittsburgh, to me, looks like a team that might just go on a run for the rest of the season. Russell Wilson threw the game-winning touchdown against Washington in like the final moments. That was a huge win for them. Washington's a tough team, and Pittsburgh got the win. So Wilson now has really been on a tear. He's got 7 touchdowns and only 1 interception in 3 games as a starter this season. And this was a very strong performance for him. Coming out of the bye week to see that was telling. And I think the Mike Williams addition was a strong one for this team. I think that this offense is going to be more reliable over the rest of the season than they were earlier in the season. I'm bullish on Wilson. He makes my top 10 ads. Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is now rushed for a touchdown in back-to-back weeks. So this is like the disconnection between regular football and fantasy football. Daniel Jones in regular football is probably not a starter next year in the NFL. That's sort of the way it's trending. But in fantasy football, Daniel Jones is going to be viable for us because he's got rushing upside, which we saw the last 2 weeks with the back-to-back touchdowns. He had a quarterback 5 overall finish against Washington in week 9, and he's got excellent matchups coming up after New York's bye week. So if you're looking for a streamer, Daniel Jones is going to be a fun one over the next few weeks. Obviously, he doesn't have, there's risk with him. And it's not like as big a ceiling, I think, as some of these guys. But Daniel Jones with the rushing upside, with healthy Malik Neighbors, he's got a fantasy floor right there. Tyrone Tracy playing exceptional football as well. Besides the fumble. Fantasy-wise, Tracy's crushing it. Will Levis, Superflex managers, he's back on the radar, available in 93% of leagues. He had his best game of the season, which wasn't a high bar, but he still had his best game of the season in his first game back from injury. Will Levis is back into the starting consideration for Superflex managers. Jameis Winston coming out of his bye week. Jameis Winston's a Superflex starter. We're hoping that we see more performances like week 8, where he had 330 yards passing and 3 touchdown passes. Then he followed it up with a 3-interception game in week 9. So there's inconsistency, but we have seen what a ceiling game looks like for Winston, and we've seen what a floor game looks like for Winston. Cedric Tillman's really coming on. He's got some decent weapons around him, and we know Jameis Winston is going to take some shots, which for us is exactly what we want as fantasy managers. Trey Lance, Superflex managers, keep an eye on Trey Lance. If Trey Lance starts this week, he's going to rush for yards. Trey Lance has rushing upside, similar to like when Malik Willis filled in for Jordan Love earlier this year. That's sort of like what we could expect from Trey Lance. A lot of design runs, and for what it's worth, that might be enough to get you through as like a mid-level QB2 if he rushes for a number of yards. Dallas was in really dire straits last week. They've got to make the change. Trey Lance is the one that I would keep an eye on. I'm not super excited about it, but I do think that he can rush for some yardage. Desmond Ridder, this is one that I added in a few places in like the second waiver wire run. So some leagues will have open waivers. Some leagues have like a waiver wire period and then a second waiver wire period. So in some of those leagues where it was like the Saturday, Sunday waivers, I added some Ridder in my Superflex teams because I think that he has the highest fantasy upside of any of the Raiders quarterbacks, certainly higher than Minshew. O'Connell's banged up. Ridder has just enough mobility, and he looked decent when he came in the game before Las Vegas's bye. So Ridder, if you're in a deep Superflex format, worth a speculative add as well. Let's get to the running back spot. So there's a couple of obvious names here, and the number one ad for me on my entire top 10, make sure you stick around for the end of the show. I'm going to drop the top 10 waiver wire ads. Audric Estime is my number one ad on the waiver wire. And Estime, this is it. This is time to spend some fab because this is not a sure thing, but there is a chance that Audric Estime could really help you in the fantasy football playoffs. This is a player who fell to day 3 in the NFL draft because he ran a slower than anticipated 40 time. He corrected the 40 at Notre Dame's Pro Day, but this is a rookie with size, ability to handle volume, and now it seems like Sean Payton really likes him. He had a season high 14 carries for 53 yards this past weekend. So he had the most carries of any of the Denver running backs. Looks like he really sort of took over the backfield. Now, this could still be a little bit more of an annoying committee, but I think there's a chance that we start seeing an Audric Estime with 20 carries, like as soon as this week happens. Like, this is the kind of player that can help Denver down the stretch because, again, he can absorb volume and he can rush for tough yards. He had some fumbling issues, but this is something that obviously the coaching staff thinks that he can remedy. I'm betting on Estime. I think Estime is a really fun ad for you this week. There's a chance that this doesn't work out. So if you're looking for a sure thing, this is not like if Ken Walker went down and Zach Charbonnet was available, that's like a sure thing behind you. We've seen it before. This takes a little bit of a leap of faith that Denver's coaching staff is going to continue to evolve his usage, but I'm betting on it. Audric Estime set a record at Notre Dame for most rushing touchdowns in a season last year with 18. That's Notre Dame. They've been playing football a long time. This is a player that is somewhat similar to Braylon Allen in a sense that he's a younger back with size. He's one of the youngest running backs in the NFL right now, too. I'm betting on Audric Estime. He's my number one ad. Ray Davis. Ray Davis is going to be a top 10 consideration every week for us. He should not be available, and I would guess that Ray Davis is not going to be available after this week for us on the show because he's available to you in 70% of leagues. So he's literally right on our line for making the top 10. We've seen him have a 150-yard combined game. We've seen him have touchdowns in 2 other games when James Cook was healthy. So we saw what he was capable of with James Cook out, and we've seen him help out enough when James Cook is still in. Very talented. Cam Akers. Akers would have been right there with Estime, but it looks like Aaron Jones' rib injury is nothing serious. Jones has been very tough this year, playing through pain, playing through injuries. Last year, Jones played only 12 games, but this year he's been like an Iron Man. But anyway, Akers looked good last week. And Akers is a player that if Jones has a setback and misses this week, Akers would be like a mid-level RB2. So Estime has rest of season ability. Cam Akers to me is a little bit more of a short-term contingent value play, but Akers is still very valuable ad for us this week. Trey Benson. Trey Benson is right up there with Ray Davis, except Trey Benson is available in far more leagues. Benson is an elite handcuff. He's available to you in 82% of leagues still. And James Conner has tremendous current usage, but if he were to go down, Benson would be a massive fab addition. He's explosive. He was a 3rd-round pick, very high speed score. Add Trey Benson. If Conner misses time, you're going to be really happy you added him. Gus Edwards. Now, Gus Edwards gives you a little bit of a floor. So if you're like dealing with Byemagaedon and you want to add a player who can get you like 10 points at your RB2 spot, 10 points at your flex spot, or maybe fall in the end zone, Gus Edwards could be it. He had 10 carries in his first game back, and Kamani Vidal was inactive. So Edwards finishes with 10 carries for 55 yards. He's the next man in if Dobbins misses time. And I think it could be really annoying here for Dobbins managers because I think Gus Edwards is going to vulture enough touches that Dobbins' ceiling goes down a little bit. So I've got some J.K. Dobbins. I hope I'm wrong on this one, but it just feels like the Chargers know that they have a pretty good team that looks like they're headed to the AFC playoffs. And I don't think they want to run Dobbins into the ground. And they trust Gus Edwards to absorb like 10 touches a game. So this one is a little annoying for Dobbins managers. But if you need a running back who's getting weekly touches, Gus Edwards is it. Blake Corum. Blake Corum continues to be a very, very valuable handcuff. If anything happened to Kyron Williams, he would be the next man in. He's available to you in 84% of leagues. Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert is actually rostered in quite a few leagues because I think people are adding him as a speculative ad before the trade deadline. And then there's those lazy managers who never touch their rosters and they were drafting him in the summer. So Herbert's available to you in 78% of leagues. Just traded to Cincinnati last week. He played 2 snaps, but I don't think that's the plan. I think that he's going to get up to a not quite Zach Moss level, but I think he'll end up getting a number of snaps. They'll work him in, and Chase Brown has just been exceptional. He's not going to hurt Chase Brown, but he will absorb some of those empty calorie touches. Chase Brown's going to continue to cook. He looks fantastic. If you drafted Chase Brown, really, really nice pick. Jalen Wright. Something's happening in Miami here. Raheem Mostert is sort of conceding his role to Jalen Wright, and we're starting to see Jalen Wright get a little bit more touches. Miami won a big one over LA last night, and I think Jalen Wright, you're going to continue to see him get some touches, and if Devon Achane went down, he'd be a huge ad. Jalen Wright's available in 93% of leagues. Roschon Johnson, the handcuff you want to DeAndre Swift. Roschon has no value unless Swift missed time, not getting the touches. But if DeAndre Swift went down, he's a like-for-like replacement. Damian Pierce, handcuffed to Joe Mixon. If you have Joe Mixon, might as well just pick up Damian Pierce for cheap and roll with it because they're giving Joe Mixon this enormous value of touches and volume. But I think Pierce would absorb like 80% of it with less efficiency if Mixon were to miss a week. Baltimore, if you have Derrick Henry on your roster, Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell are both interesting. Keaton Mitchell was back. Justice Hill did pretty much nothing, but both of these guys have value. Hill's been the one all year, but I think if Henry were to miss some time, Keaton Mitchell would get consideration. The coaching staff likes him. Hill obviously would get some targets if Henry missed time, but I think Keaton Mitchell would absorb a number of carries, 10 carries, 12 carries. He's a smaller back. He's never going to be a 20 carry guy, but he could be a 10 carry guy, a 12 carry guy if Henry were to miss time. Explosive speed back. Hill's available in 80% of leagues. Mitchell's available in 92% of leagues. Marshawn Lloyd, still IR eligible in a lot of leagues. When he comes back, I think he's going to take over the number 2 job in Green Bay. He'll pass Chris Brooks and Emmanuel Wilson by fairly quickly. Marshawn Lloyd, 3rd round pick in the 2024 draft, and has some stylistic comparisons to Aaron Jones in terms of like the sort of touches he would get if he was healthy in Green Bay. Kenneth Gainwell, handcuffed to Saquon Barkley. Go ahead, grab him if you have Saquon. Jeremy McNichols. If you have Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler and you want to cuff, grab Jeremy McNichols. Brian Robinson is dealing with injuries, and Jeremy McNichols has pretty much been the number 2 back. There was the Chris Rodriguez scare, but it looks like McNichols is ahead of Rodriguez still. Antonio Gibson, strictly a handcuff to Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson is seeing an increase in usage. So a number of running backs to consider this week. Let's pivot over to the wide receiver spot. Wide receiver, sort of like running back, I'm really excited about a rookie, and I'm excited about Adonai Mitchell. And I think I'm more excited about Adonai Mitchell than maybe you're going to see in other waiver wire columns or podcasts. I think there's some trepidation for Mitchell. But Mitchell, to me, this seemed like a breakout. He had 6 targets, and he caught all 6 of them. This happened just a few days after Reggie Wayne sort of signaled him out as a guy that was talented and said to be patient. Mitchell's going to start playing well. And then he did right away. So coach speak is sometimes not worth anything. And Reggie Wayne is a guy who kind of hypes guys. He hyped Alec Pierce earlier this year too. But for me, like Adonai Mitchell, this one feels right because this was a 2nd round pick, a massive performance at the NFL Combine, led Texas in touchdown catches last year, caught a touchdown in the college football playoffs for 2 separate schools, Georgia and Texas. So like Mitchell's sort of the real deal as a prospect. And he's already flashed this year as an elite separator. A lot of separation, like a lot of analytics people have already really liked Mitchell. So this feels right to me. Michael Pittman Jr. is week to week, and I think he's really banged up. There was the whole Pittman's going to the IR rumor, and then it fell apart and he just kept playing. I think he could get shut down. Mitchell is a guy who I want to have on as many rosters as possible. And you also have Alec Pierce. Mitchell's available in 94% of leagues. Pierce is available in 85%. So if you are just simply looking at the box scores, Alec Pierce is really enticing because he had that touchdown. He had like 80 receiving yards, but the touchdown happened at like the very, very end of the game and to make it a 30-20 game. So I'm more into Mitchell than Pierce because I want to speculate. We've sort of seen Pierce now for several seasons. We sort of know what he is. He's a boom bust guy, but Mitchell I think could end up being a little more consistent. So Pierce doesn't make my top 10. Mitchell does. Josh Palmer, if you're in a deep league, he had 63 or more yards in 3 out of the last 4 games played. He's available in 85% of leagues. Chargers offense trending up. Justin Herbert trending up. Noah Brown. This is a fun one. Noah Brown is available to you in 87% of leagues. He's had a 20% plus target share over his last 3 games, and his targets are very similar to Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. He's got 20 targets over his last 3 games. So like Noah Brown is getting the targets. He's a locked in wide receiver 2 in Washington. If you're in like a start 3 wide receiver format with a flex in PPR, Noah Brown is definitely a consideration. And I see him available in a number of leagues that are still competitive. Like there's some FFPC leagues out there, some maybe probably not an NFFC, but FFPC, there's definitely some where Noah Brown's available. Rashad Bateman, this player makes my top 10 overall. And I think this is another one where I'm a little bit more excited about Bateman than others. Baltimore can't stop anybody this year. This is a different Baltimore Ravens team. So for us to say we're only going to chase 1 or like 2 or 3 Ravens skill position players like we do in other seasons, I don't think that's the case. Like Baltimore's defense has been super generous. You're going to see a lot more shootouts. And we just saw one with Cincinnati. And that game was incredible. We want more games like that for fantasy football. But Rashad Bateman in that game, like the story of the game was obviously Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. Guys were insane. But Rashad Bateman had 8 targets. He caught 6 of them. That was a season high in targets. Tied a season high in targets. And he had a season high in catches with 6. He also caught a touchdown pass. Deontay Johnson is simply a depth piece. It's Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman in 2 wide receiver sets. I think Rashad Bateman is a flex consideration in a number of weeks because of the quality of the Baltimore offense. And he's continually been a player that this coaching staff really, really likes. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, available in 98% of leagues. Do I want you to spend fab on MVS? No, I don't. But I do want to point out that he was in my sleepers article last week. So if you're looking for sleeper content, I drop a sleeper podcast and a sleeper YouTube stream and a sleeper article at Player Profiler. And I think we were like the only one in the industry that had MVS listed in it. So maybe you want to come over and check it out for the rest of the season. But don't go paying for those touchdowns. You know what MVS is. He's a 30-year-old wide receiver who just had his best game of the season. Don't go paying for that. Let somebody else in your league pay for that. And if you want to take a shot on MVS doing it 2 games in a row, make it like a 2% bid. Just price check it. 5% max. I'm not going to be bidding on him. I don't think this will happen again. The targets were very low, like 3 targets, but 2 of them were touchdowns, long ones. That was fun, but leave it alone. Let somebody else spend money on him. I'd rather see you spend money on a player like Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore has 27 targets over his last 3 games, and we want to roster wide receivers attached to Jameis Winston. Elijah Moore finished with 8 catches for 85 yards in week 8. This is a player that I'm not sure what's going to happen after the bye week. This is one where I think there's going to be some self-scouting as to like where these targets go. Cedric Tillman is locked in. David Njoku's locked in. And then it's like Judy, Elijah Moore. Does Nick Chubb turn it around, get some positive scoring? I'm not sure. But I would take some shots on Elijah Moore because of the target volume. He's also playing the slot a great deal. So he's sort of an easy bet that won't cost you anything. One player is going to cost you a little bit this week, but also makes my top 10 overall is John Mechie. And anybody who's followed John Mechie's story, it's incredibly inspiring. This is a player that obviously had immense health scares off the field, came back from it. But at one time, Mechie was a 2nd-round pick out of Alabama, had speed. This was an enticing prospect. And he just had his best game as a pro. 5 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. Nico Collins should be back this week. And if he's not back this week, he should be back the following week in week 12. I think Nico's going to be back in week 11. But involving Mechie as the wide receiver 3 would be a rational coaching move. So when we think about the beginning of the season, when it was Collins, Diggs, and Dell, I think it's going to be Collins, Dell, and Mechie for the rest of the season in that same regard. And Tank Dell has really not been consistent and not been playing at a high level. So Mechie could be very similar to Dell in terms of production for the rest of the season. I really want to root on John Mechie, but I think it's warranted to make him a top 10 addition this week. And he is available to you in a lot of formats. He's available in 99% of leagues. Add some John Mechie. Another wide receiver to consider, Mike Williams. Mike Williams is available to you in 92% of leagues. Just caught a touchdown. Now, obviously, he just got off the plane from New York. I assume he took a plane. It would make sense to go from Jersey to Pittsburgh in a plane if you're Mike Williams. But Mike Williams caught a touchdown. He's another big body for Russell Wilson. We're bullish on Russell Wilson and this Pittsburgh offense taking a step forward. Mike Williams needs to have more target volume to become viable. But again, he just caught a touchdown. This is a player that helped them win a huge game. I think he's going to earn a larger role. We'll see, though. Kayshon Boutte, 6 targets now in 3 straight games with not a whole lot of production. But he still has to make this waiver wire column because in some of these leagues that are super deep, you don't have that many options, and Boutte is getting targeted. So in theory, he could produce, but I don't want to bet too much on him. He's a 1% bid. or a $0 bid if your league allows it. Jalen Coker. So Jalen Coker had a very disappointing week 9, and a lot of people used him as a spot start. So he was on a lot of benches last week or cut, but now he gets 8 targets. So we can't ignore him because of the targets, but there is a chance he loses snaps to Adam Thielen very soon, right after the bye week. So Thielen's available to you in 77% of leagues. Carolina just won 2 games in a row. There's a little bit of goodwill there, and I think Dave Canales is trying to get a little momentum for next year. So I don't think they're just going to lay down and ensure they're already going to get a high draft pick. But I don't know if they're going to lay down and just tank it the rest of the way. I think that doesn't seem in character with them. So I think Thielen being on the field a lot might be a possibility. He's cheap, and he could end up being the number 1 target. He could out-target Leggett and Coker if they want to use him in that way. And any way you cut it, he's going to be on the field a lot. Demario Douglas, he has 11 catches over his last 2 games, and he has 4 games with 9 targets. He's sort of the boring floor play in New England and the one sort of wide receiver who's somewhat reliable for fantasy, but obviously has no ceiling whatsoever. Just know what you're getting with Demario Douglas. He's had one really big game this season where he went over 20 points. The rest of the 9 target games have been games that were like purgatory at best sort of production. Darius Slayton, we talked about Daniel Jones's schedule. For the big bye weeks where it's week 12, week 14 buys, Darius Slayton will be an option for you with 6 teams on bye. Slayton's available in 99% of leagues. He's played well this season. We all recall his big spike week when Malik Neighbors was out and he put up a huge line. Devaughn Vele, this is a deep league option only. Vele caught his first touchdown of the season, and he had 4 receptions on Sunday. Rookie wide receiver in Denver. Let's start at the tight end spot. So Jonnu Smith is basically getting low-end tight end 1 usage, high-end tight end 2 usage, but he remains sort of widely available. He almost scored a touchdown on Monday Night Football, and it was a beautiful play where he made a few cuts. He really he flashed that sort of Jonnu Smith yak ability that always makes you sort of get excited when the ball's in his hands. So this is a player that had a season high number of snaps in week 9 and caught 5 passes. So he's sort of been trending up. I like Jonnu Smith if you need a tight end 2 or a player that is a viable bye week fill-in. Dawson Knox, this is one to keep an eye on, available in 99% of leagues. Dalton Kincaid has a knee injury. I don't think it's anything serious, but Buffalo is on a bye week coming up in week 12. So it would sort of make sense if Buffalo just sat Dalton Kincaid this week and you got a spot start out of Knox, and then they bring Kincaid back after the bye week. That's sort of just my gut feel, is that you're going to get a 1 week of Dawson Knox. Obviously, he's a player that over the years has caught touchdowns from Josh Allen, and he could be a touchdown or bust tight end streamer. And certainly if you have Dalton Kincaid, just add Dawson Knox for a little bit of insurance in case Kincaid's announced out on Friday or Saturday. Easy swap in. Will Dissly, available in 98% of leagues. Since LA's bye week, Dissly has had 4 or more catches in 4 out of his last 5 games. And this past week, Will Dissly had a 30% target share, 30% plus target share. He's become a significant part of LA's offense, sort of like a Zach Ertz of LA, where he's not giving you the immense ceiling, but he does have that baked-in floor. He really doesn't have a ceiling. But again, with the bye weeks, he's going to be an interesting one because I think he can get you that 8 to 10 points at the tight end position. If you want a little more upside at the tight end spot, we've got 2 rookies. Jatavian Sanders is available to you in 97% of leagues. He's trending up. 4th round pick this year out of Texas. He caught a touchdown this past week, and he had 4 catches for 87 yards in week 9. So Jatavian Sanders is a guy that we saw have an 87-yard performance in week 9 and now a touchdown catch in week 10. He's trending up. If you want sort of an upside option for the rest of the season, maybe Sanders is the one after the bye week that we're sort of leaning into. it's not out of the question that we get a rookie tight end that comes on this time of year. If you think about like the Chig Okonkwo rookie year, Pat Freiermuth rookie year, it usually happens around now, like this week 10, week 11, and then they sort of just stay in our lineup. So don't discount Jatavian Sanders' recent success. Theo Johnson, great first name, probably the best first name in the history of the NFL. But Theo Johnson's available in 98% of leagues. He had 6 targets in back-to-back games, and he continues to flash that elite athleticism that we all know he had from like the combine, the RAS score, that he's right there with that sort of elite athleticism. And what a draft from the New York Giants on both sides of the ball. They have a number of players who are going to stick. If they can get that quarterback position right and shore up the offensive line a little bit more, that could be a team that in 2025 takes a step forward. And I think Theo Johnson is the long-term answer at tight end in New York. Obviously, this is a guy with sort of a capped ceiling. There's other pass-catching options, and Daniel Jones is not going to support like 4 players every week. So know what you're getting with Johnson. If you're in a dynasty league, Sanders and Johnson are both good targets for you if you're looking to like make a trade, that sort of thing. Okay, the top 10 overall ads. And we went a little bit long this week, but I think it was worth it because we covered a lot of names. So hope you're enjoying this, whether it's on a podcast, whether you're watching it on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to both. We really appreciate the subscriptions to our YouTube channel and also to our podcast. So we're bringing this every single week in addition to a lot of other great shows. So here we go. Top 10 overall ranking. Again, all of these players are available to you in 70% of leagues or more. Audric Estime, number 1 ad. I think Audric Estime is the one. This is the one that I really, really want to have wherever I can get him, and I don't have to like completely break the bank. Number 2, Trey Benson. I love Trey Benson if James Conner misses time. Rashad Bateman, number 3. This is a player that I think can be a wide receiver 4 rest of the season. Adonai Mitchell at number 4. Love Adonai Mitchell. I think the talent is there. If Michael Pittman gets shut down, you're going to be glad you added Mitchell this week. Cam Akers at number 5, in case Aaron Jones misses this week. Blake Corum at number 6. If Kyron Williams goes down, would be a huge ad. Tied at number 6, Drake May. Then number 7, Gus Edwards. Number 8, Jonnu Smith. Number 9, John Mechie. And number 10, Russell Wilson. I did not include Ray Davis because he's got a bye next week. And I think that for a lot of you, he's already rostered. He's right at our threshold. But he would be right there with like Akers and Corum, right around number 5 in the overall if he's available in your league. So Audric Estime, Trey Benson, Rashad Bateman, Adonai Mitchell, Cam Akers, Blake Corum, Drake May, Gus Edwards, Jonnu Smith, John Mechie, and Russell Wilson is your top 10 overall. I'm Theo Gremminger. Stick with me all week long. I've got you covered with multiple podcasts like this. Make sure you're checking out Dynasty Life, press coverage, and Sleepers, Streamers, and Stashes, my Sleepers podcast and Sleepers YouTube show that drops right here on Fridays or Saturdays almost every single week right here at Player Profiler. And make sure you're checking out School of Scott. I'm doing that over with Fantasy Points. That is a show I'm doing with Scott Barrett from Fantasy Points. Check out the podcast version of that one. We're going to see you back next week. This is almost the end. We've got a 1-month run until your fantasy playoffs in week 15. And for some of you, you've got fantasy playoffs starting in week 14. So we got to get it. Let's shore up our rosters. Let's crush our leagues this season.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.